Good evening, everyone. My name is JT Rose, and I lead product marketing for Azure App Service. This is the first of two Ask the Expert panels that we're hosting on migrating and modernizing .NET apps with Azure. We have a great group of experts on the line today from Azure and from the ASP.NET teams. I'm going to introduce them shortly, but before I do, I want to get through some rules of the road and set some expectations for this session. Okay, so everyone online can use the chat function to ask questions. Your questions will show up to attendees once they've been approved by one of our moderators. And you can also upvote your favorite questions using the thumbs up, and experts on the line around the world will be able to answer your questions either verbally on camera or by chat, and we'll try to get as many of them as we can. We'll also be providing links to additional resources throughout in the chat window and at the end of the session. Just a quick note on etiquette. This session may be recorded, so please help our moderators out and don't spam the chat with inappropriate content or anything like that. We also ask that everyone adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct. We want this event to be respectful and inclusive and fun for everybody, but we don't tolerate disruptive or disrespectful behavior, harassment of any kind. So I would appreciate it if everyone could abide by those simple rules, and we can have a great discussion. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. From left to right, we have Gaurav Seth, who's a PM on our app service team, who looks after migrations. Stefan Schakow is the PM lead for app service, one of the OGs of our web app business. Christina Compi is a principal PM who leads our work on our isolated environments and does a lot of work on advanced networking. We also have Dan Roth, who's our principal PM on the ASP.NET team and a resident expert on all things .NET 5, Blazor, modern web apps. Byron Tardif from the app service team and Jared Parsons from the .NET team have also joined us this evening. They're going to be on camera to help answer some of our questions as well. And we have a deep bench of other engineers, MVPs, and partners on the chat to help answer all of your questions. So before we get started, I want to review just quickly what we talked about in our digital breakout session earlier this afternoon. We talked quite a lot about why even migrate to Azure. I think from a .NET perspective, Microsoft's been the steward of .NET and SQL, of IIS and Windows Server and Visual Studio for over 2 decades. And we've spent those years not just improving those products, but also building a fully managed home in Azure for them and the apps that they depend on. We've built those services in Azure on IIS, on the SQL code base. And because of that, we're able to offer enterprise SLAs on literally millions of .NET apps, trillions of SQL queries, billions of requests every day. And over the last couple of years, we've really leaned in here. I think we've built some really first-class migration assistants to assess your .NET apps and migrate them seamlessly to Azure. And just this year, we introduced a new offer in the Azure Migration Program to provide engineering support and partner support and subsidies to help you bring .NET apps into App Service and even to Azure SQL. Lastly, I think another area that we've really invested in is helping existing Microsoft customers. The Azure Hybrid Benefit and the Enterprise Dev Test offers are really meant to help you maximize the investment in your existing on-prem SQL and Visual Studio licenses and bring that value, extend the value up to Azure. The bottom line, we've really tried to build Azure as the best place to run .NET apps. And this week, what we spent a lot of the session talking about was some new investments that we've been making in .NET and App Service to extend that value. So to help get us started, I've suggested just a few topics here. This is from our breakout session earlier. Obviously, a lot of great, exciting news in App Service and .NET. Maybe I can start us off with a question from the chat earlier, Stefan. Someone asked, what can I do with PV3 that I couldn't do with PV2?
Yeah, sure. Definitely a great question. I mean, there are a number of things, right? Right off the bat, the increased memory headroom and CPU horsepower that we've got in PV3, we think will definitely make it attractive, especially to customers who might have been bumping into the memory constraints on what they have in our hardware today, right? And to recap, right, the top end now, the new PV3 line has 32 gig of memory in it, which we think will be great again for maybe like content management system workloads, maybe memory intensive Java workloads, those kinds of scenarios. Now, one of the reasons beyond just getting that new hardware in was that with the introduction of Windows containers and the fact that we run it in that much tighter security boundary, because remember the Windows containers offering that we just announced, it runs using Hyper-V virtualization. So it's that VM in a VM technology that's there on Windows Server. And that necessitated bringing in a new hardware SKU that can actually support that. The nice thing about it, though, is for existing apps that are out there that need to do stuff like, install a custom component, call into GDI, again, like Gaurav showed earlier, rendering PDF, things that traditionally you couldn't do on App Service. Now with the Hyper-V isolated Windows containers, we support those kinds of workloads and those kinds of scenarios. So that really hopefully widens the aperture and the breadth of the kind of workloads that folks can bring up onto App Service. And then just given all the work involved in bringing this new SKU up, and you alluded to it earlier, right? We've been very intentional in terms of bringing in a lot of the new, more attractive pricing price points, right? So we have dev test offers out there that make both Windows and Linux usage a lot more approachable. I think when I was looking at it earlier, it's somewhere like a 25% reduction on Linux, more than 50% price reduction when you run a dev test offer on PV3. And then similarly, it'll come out here on November 1st. We're also rolling out reserved instance pricing across the board for PV3. And that's incredibly attractive because you're looking at like more than a third off the list prices if you're on a 1-year commitment, and more than 50% off when you're on a 3-year commitment. And when you combine that with the fact that just the underlying SKU is a lot more powerful than what we have with PV2 today, I think it makes for really a great offer. And from our point of view, it's hopefully the SKU of choice for all of you as our developers and customers going forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think when we started talking about this early in the year, you were saying that you wanted to build really our most cost-effective and performant SKU ever on App Service, and make it more approachable for many more apps. Andrew, I know you're on the line and you really led a lot of the work around Windows Container. Can you talk about what you've been working on and what you're excited about on Windows Container?
Sure. A lot of the things that we're excited about with Windows Container GA is being able to bring workloads that were previously prevented from coming to App Service. So key elements, specifically migration of existing apps, are around where there's dependencies that need to be installed on the workers themselves, which is something that we don't allow in App Service. But with Windows containers, you can ship those dependencies directly in the container. App Service for Windows Code apps, we run inside our own custom sandbox, which presents some issues for customers migrating certain components. Things like PDF generation is often done through GDI calls at the lowest level, and we block that at the sandbox, so it prevents a number of components being used. Having now effect the security boundary being the Windows container itself, it means that we can open up access to those components, because now you can do whatever you like inside that container. That container is the isolation boundary. So it's going to really open up the type of workloads that can actually come and have a very seamless integration, whereas also still benefiting from all of the benefits of App Service, deployment slots, fast scaling, all of the different capabilities that we have as being a PaaS, but now you can bring your application inside a container. So it's really going to unlock a path for a lot of customers to migrate.
That's great. We actually got a question in the chat while you were talking. Harpreet was asking, our .NET Framework web applications rely on COM+ components. And as I recall, COM+, some of the custom OS dependencies that have, hindered use of App Service in the past. That's one of the things that Windows Containers kind of opens the door for. Is that right?
Certainly, yes, because I'm looking at Harpreet's question right now, and things like server registration, registry keys, GAC registration, all of those things that you need to do at the low level of the OS, customers can now do in the container itself, and then ship the application inside the container with all those registrations already pre-built in. Whereas previously in the app service standard offering for Windows Code, we don't allow customers to get to that level of the OS. But in the container world, then you could do that. So that's certainly an option for that customer to be able to migrate their applications inside a Windows container and then go from that path.
Awesome. There was another question here, Byron. I think you started to answer it on chat. Are there any plans to enable file system access for app service?
Yeah, and that is a feature that is currently in preview for Linux, both code and container scenarios. And for Windows, it's also in preview for container scenarios. And we're working through to get it to the level of GA quality for all of those scenarios, as well as enable it in preview for Windows. And for those folks that don't know what this feature is, what it lets you do is it lets you create an Azure storage account with an Azure file share, and then attach that as a symlink on your web app. So you can redirect things like /media to put all of your images or all of your content in there, and then serve it from your application. So that way you're not limited by the storage that App Service gives you. And it also lets you manage that through Azure Storage Explorer or through other mechanisms.
Awesome. Dan, I think we got a couple of questions in the session just about .NET 5, and you covered a lot of ground in the session, but what are you most excited about with .NET 5?
Oh man, there's so much stuff. It's a huge release. Across .NET 5, let's see, the things that come to mind. Well, performance first comes to mind. Like, I don't know if there's a great blog post from Stephen Tope on the .NET blog where he goes through in great detail all of the amazing perf investments that have been done in .NET 5, from the GC to the framework libraries, like in system text JSON, significantly faster, regex expressions, significantly faster. For different architectures, like ARM64 support, we've done a ton of perf work in the ARM64 support in .NET 5 to bring it up to par with the rest of the architectures that we already support. Of course, my favorite topic is Blazor. There's lots of Blazor improvements in .NET 5, including a lot of performance work that went into running .NET on WebAssembly. In our most recent tests, we're seeing component rendering speeds 2 to 3 times faster than what they were with Blazor WebAssembly in the 3.2 release. So, twice as fast JSON parsing, just all around generally faster runtime performance improvements. Single file support is in .NET 5, where you can publish your entire app as a single exe with all of its dependencies. If you're dealing with containers, the container images are significantly smaller with .NET 5, so it makes it easier for you to move them around. C#9 has all the immutability support, like record types, init-only properties. There's a lot of great stuff in .NET 5, and it's pretty much close to being done. We shipped the first release candidate earlier this month. We're getting pretty close to wrapping up the second release candidate that we plan to put out there just in a couple weeks here in October, and then it will GA on November 10th at the upcoming .NET Conf event.
Awesome. There was I know we got some questions about this while you were showing the demo, but it just popped up in the chat here again that the Blazor version of the Parts Unlimited app that you built. I think you built it over the weekend. You were sharing it with us. What is that going to be available in GitHub? Are you able to share that with folks?
Absolutely. I put it in. I'll put the answer out there. I work on everything I do is open source. So I don't know how to do anything that's not just public and open source. I've actually been working on that demo publicly for weeks now. It's on my private GitHub account at danroth27/Parts Unlimited. Feel free to take a look at what I did there. Feel free to send me a PR to make it even better.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we were really excited about is, I think we're doing a ton of work to make existing .NET Framework apps run really well in the cloud and be super thoughtful about making app service comfortable and familiar from day one, for folks that are used to building with .NET. But obviously, extending apps with modern front ends with Blazor is just such a cool thing, and we were glad to see that in public preview for static web apps. Christina, I got a question for you actually. This one came up in some of our earlier sessions. What ACE v3 is, I think, the result of several years of investment for you and for the rest of the team. What can you do with ACE v3 right now at public preview, and what's on the roadmap for the next couple of months that you can share?
So it's not in public preview yet, but once it hits public preview, the thing you can do is not worry about any of the networking dependencies anymore. That's probably the biggest one right out of the gate. So with ACE v3, we deployed the actual ACE in a network that's under Microsoft's control, and we use the injection technologies we've been building and developing over the years to inject inbound and outbound traffic for applications in the customer's network. So what this means is we can secure the ACE to our heart's content, and we won't break your applications. And you can secure your ACE environment in your network, and you won't affect the app service environment at all. So today, if you were to say block all access outbound to the internet, that would be a problem because we have dependencies of a variety of like databases and storage. Well, with ACE v3, you won't have any of that. The other thing that maybe one or two people might appreciate is that we got rid of the stamp fee. You're still able to give us the money if you really want to, but yeah, that's no longer a thing with ACE v3.
Yeah, I know that was one of the investments that we really wanted to prioritize for ACE v3, and I think the promise there is we can reduce the cost of deployment up to, in some places, 80%, which makes running those isolated environments much more approachable for people, which is really exciting.
Definitely. Now, there's a few things we're going to add on to it because I know I'm going to get the questions if I don't answer it. Yes, we're working on rapid scale that's being added on top of this. We'll be adding other additional VM sizes, so ACE v3 will have the ability at some point where you can pick VM sizes beyond just the 3 immediate SKUs. We'll be developing a mix of other capabilities that take advantage of the fact that we've reworked the infrastructure, so it's based on top of scale sets, which among other things means you'll get availability zones built into the product.
Awesome. Yeah, this is something we've been super excited about. I know you and the team have been working really hard on it.
Hey, JT, just to jump in on that, Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't that also mean some of our customers in the future can go out and like buy an entire chunk of bare metal, as it were, and say, gimme, this is now my ACE v3?
Yes, that's also coming. So yeah, you'll be able to have dedicated metal with your ACE. So you'll be able to deploy your ACE on a dedicated host, and that'll be great for if you've got like power company or finance or insurance or government type of uses, then yeah, you can own the stack all the way down to the metal. It's single tenant down past the hypervisor down to the physical machine. So yes, that's another nice win. Forgot to mention it. Thank you, Stefan.
There was another thing that I don't know that we had time to actually mention in the session, but I think is super exciting. It's the GitHub Action integrations. Stefan, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Actually, I was going to say, since we got Byron here or Jason, those are the folks who are tied in very, very tightly with it. They can give a great rundown on it.
Yeah, so this is something that Jason basically owns the backend, how it works, and I own the UI. So one of the things that you will notice is that we have first-class integration with GitHub Actions when you're trying to deploy or automate the deployment of your app. What that means is that you can basically point us to the repo, and we will drop a workflow file that is crafted, and this is where the magic that Jason does comes in, that is crafted per stack to do the right thing as far as doing the build and doing the deployment into the web app. We also have the new preview of the next version of Deployment Center, which also went live this week. That extends that to not only code scenarios, but containers as well. So you could have a web app that's containerized, and it will do the build, it will push it into Azure Container Registry, and it'll update the reference so that your container-based application can run off of that. Jason, anything you want to add on top of that?
No, I think you got the gist of it there. I'm going to post some links in the chat for more information for everybody, but yeah, that's it.
Awesome.
And we're working on also adding support in the command line for these scenarios as well. So when you're doing AC Web App Up, that's something that you will be able to do with GitHub Actions as well.
I see we got a question from Harpreet in the chat about the Azure migration program and the migration tooling. I can take a crack at that. So the Azure migration program we started about a year ago to create really a consolidated scale program for helping customers migrate infrastructure into Azure. So build a landing zone, get connected with a partner with an advanced specialization in the work, get connected with Azure engineers that can help do the actual migration and provide best practices, and also provide subsidies to those partners for doing the work. This past year, so in August, I guess, we introduced a new offer to the Azure migration program that provides discrete support for the migration of .NET applications, ASP.NET apps, and the SQL databases that power them to move into App Service and Azure SQL. So the PaaS services that we built specifically to host those workloads, we wanted to provide partners and engineering support and subsidies to make that move, not just to lift them into VMs, but to bring them to these fully managed services. So if you've been working with .NET for a while and you have one or a number of .NET apps and SQL databases that sit on, I think it's a minimum of 20 VMs on premises, just a small threshold. You can nominate that to the Azure migration program, and we'll assign a partner, or you can bring a partner yourself to work with our engineering teams, get some subsidies, and bring those into App Service and Azure SQL. The migration tooling, maybe Gaurav, do you want to talk a little bit about the migration tooling? I know you're close to that.
Yeah, so in terms of the migration tooling for ASP.NET web applications, so today we have a tool called App Services Migration Assistant. So you can actually go to appmigration.microsoft.com and download the tool. Now, what the tool does is firstly, it does an assessment for your web application in terms of the readiness, if it can move to Azure App Services, and we run approximately 13 readiness checks around ports and protocols and what kind of authentication you're using, for example. And once you're done with authentication, we allow you to automatically package your content and config and move it over to Azure App Services. It's a pretty seamless experience for you when it comes to assessment and migration of your web apps on ASP.NET. The tool also enables you for scenarios where if you have databases with your web applications, which is mostly the case, you can actually set up hybrid scenarios where you may or may not immediately move your databases and have your web application itself in Azure App Service and use hybrid connections to talk back to data sources or other data sources on premises.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that's a big area of investment for us, is just making it super seamless to bring those apps into App Service. Jared, I feel like we haven't come to you. Do you want to talk? I know we got some questions earlier today about records. Do you want to talk a little bit about that area?
Sure thing. So records are a feature that we're adding in C#9. And what they are is, if you look at consumer code, a lot of code, like if you look at web apps or EF Core or just general data passing, customers spend a lot of times like writing small types to contain values. You write your points, your persons, your addresses. And what we found is like if you look at those types, they have a lot of similar properties. Like people want to add a quality to them. They want to essentially have them play well with pattern matching. They might want them to be immutable objects. And while C# makes it easy to like add all of those kind of behaviors to these types, and it's not a lot of code, if you take the aggregate of that, like if you look at all like the number of times people define these types in their programs and have to repeat that small amount of boilerplate code over and over again, it can be quite burdensome. And so records is a feature where we make it as simple as possible to define these values. They get all of these behaviors for free. They give you essentially equality, they give you deconstruction, they work with pattern matching, and they'll even be immutable by default if you want them to be. You can make them mutable if that's more your preference, but you get all of that kind of behavior for free. And so we're hoping that this is something that will really let customers start focusing more on kind of their business logic and their code, and not so much the ceremony and boilerplate code of defining these types and these behaviors over and over and over again.
Awesome. Let me see if there's, I'm going to pop over to the chat to see if there's any other questions. Jason, is there any ones that I haven't gotten to yet?
No, nothing waiting in new.
Let's see, hold on. There was a question here, as part of migration, do we have a roadmap for desktop apps, VB6, Windows Forms, etc.? I don't know, Dan or Stefan, Gaurav, do you guys have any thoughts there? I know from a programmatic perspective, it's not quite on the roadmap yet, but.
Well, I can speak to a little bit about the desktop support in .NET Core and in .NET 5. WinForms and WPF are both now supported as part of .NET Core. You can build WinForms and WPF apps with .NET Core 3.1, which is a long-term supported release. And of course, they also feed into the .NET 5 release. So WinForms and WPF benefit from all of the feature improvements and the general improvements in .NET 5. So you can use C#9 features. You can use the single file exe support, for example. So that's the roadmap for those two sets of technologies. I can't really speak to VB6. It's great to know VB6 is still going strong. Don't have much of an update on the roadmap for that.
I think for those scenarios, it's the desktop virtualization that makes more sense, where you virtualize the whole desktop and you get remote desktop into your old application, but hosted on a VM on the cloud. There's no like lift and shift for running WinForms-based application on a browser, right?
Got it. Let me look back in here. I think we may have time for one more question, if we've got any sitting here in the chat that we've not gotten to. Let me look here. Stefan, it looks like you talked a little bit about the organizational goal for sustainability that Srini was.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure specifically what, because granted that's a very broad area. So I did put up a link there that goes to a page for Azure All Up about sustainability, and then just right on a more tactical basis. Right, even though we're all the way up the stack, and hey, you're running on an abstracted PaaS service, it's running on VMs, it's running on a fabric, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, 20 layers down below us, ultimately, it's what we all know, right? There's a data center, it's got to pull HVAC, cooling, power, the whole 9 yards. And so, it's one of those things where, look, if you have the time to right size your apps, make sure that maybe periodically you do what I jokingly call spring cleaning. Do you really need all those app service plans? Do you really have all those apps sitting on the right kind of hardware? And, trim back what isn't needed, tweak the auto scale rules, modify what you're using. I mean, the reality is it's just, right, it's good hygiene for a bunch of different reasons. And at the end of the day, if you do wind it back 20 layers deep below us, it does mean like, okay, there's a little bit less power, a little bit less water, et cetera, that we need to pull all up, right? Because that's ultimately what powers the data centers.
Awesome. I want to thank all of our experts, both on the chat and on camera. I think we've had a great discussion, and thanks everyone for joining and for dropping in your questions. We have some additional resources here. You can read the blog that goes over all the great investments that we are making this week. The tools in the Azure Migration Program offer are also linked there. Obviously, get .NET 5, the link's right there. I know it's a tongue twister, but Dan, I'll get there eventually. And then our engineering teams have a bunch of release notes and best practices that they put on that bottom link. So check them out, and we look forward to seeing you throughout the rest of Ignite. Thanks, everyone.